I was just starting to enjoy the quiet of my Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang. It wasn't an unusual sound, but today, something about it felt different. I was in the middle of organizing my living room, sorting through old clothes and deciding what to donate. The day was warm, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a peaceful glow across the room. But that chime pulled me back to reality. I opened the door to find her standing there, the woman I'd known as Karen from down the street. Her presence alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. Not because she was necessarily unfriendly, but because she had this way of taking over a space the moment she entered it. She was standing there, wearing a wide smile, and holding a large canvas tote bag, her go-to accessory whenever she was in one of her helping moods. "Hi there," she said, her voice too chipper for my current mood. "I was just walking by, and I saw you were tidying up. You know, I love a good spring cleaning." "Hi, Karen," I said, trying to keep the tone casual. "Yeah, just sorting through some stuff." She peered past me, her gaze quickly scanning the front porch. There were a few boxes stacked by the door, things I had intended to take to a donation center later. "Oh, this is so perfect," Karen exclaimed, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. "I've been thinking I need to declutter my house, and you're already halfway there." She gestured toward the boxes. "Can I take some of these?" I blinked, momentarily stunned. I'm not giving anything away right now. Those are just, for donation." "Right," she said, nodding enthusiastically. "But you know what they say. One man's trash is another woman's treasure." Karen stepped closer, picking up a decorative vase from one of the boxes and inspecting it closely. "This will look perfect in my entryway," she added as if it were already hers. I stepped back, my heart racing a little. "I'm just trying to sort through things, not having a giveaway or anything." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be silly. I'm sure you've got so much stuff to get rid of. You're probably just overwhelmed. Let me help you. I could use a few things, and I'd be doing you a favor, really." I felt my patience thinning. "Karen, I'm not giving anything away today," I repeated, more firmly this time, but she didn't seem to hear me. Instead, she took the vase and started heading toward her car. "Seriously, I'll just borrow this for now. If you change your mind, let me know. I've got a perfect spot for it." Karen smiled brightly, practically skipping toward her car. I stood frozen for a moment, torn between letting it go and confronting her. The vase was a wedding gift from my grandmother, and the thought of her treating it like something she could just take without asking felt like a violation. "Karen," I called out, finally finding my voice. "That's not yours. Please bring it back." She stopped, turning around with a confused look. "Oh, come on. I'm just helping you out. You won't even miss it." "I will," I said firmly, crossing the threshold and stepping onto the porch. "I'm not giving it away, and you need to bring it back now." She paused, looking me over with that patronizing smile of hers. "I don't see the problem, really. You're just trying to get rid of things, and I'm doing you a favor by taking them off your hands. Trust me, I have an eye for this kind of stuff. I know what works in my house." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "It's not a giveaway," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please bring it back." For a moment, she just stood there, seemingly confused, as though she couldn't fathom why I was being so stubborn. Then she huffed, as though humoring me, and walked back up to the porch, returning the vase with a grudging sigh. "They're happy now?" she asked, her tone sharp as she handed it back. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even, though my annoyance was bubbling under the surface. "But really, Karen, I need you to stop doing that." She gave me a long look, her smile faltering for a second before it returned, albeit a bit strained. "Well, if you change your mind, just let me know. I can always use more stuff." With that, she turned on her heel and left, the sound of her shoes clicking against the pavement fading as she walked away. I stood there for a moment, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through me. It had been a small thing, just a vase, but it had felt like a breach of my space, of my life. Karen's assumption that she could just take what wasn't hers, without even asking, felt like the first domino in a line that might be about to fall. I stood there for a few more minutes, staring at the vase in my hands. It wasn't just about the vase. It was about the principle. This wasn't the first time Karen had crossed a line, and I could already feel the tension between us building. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I went back inside, shook off the encounter, and tried to focus on my tasks. But it wasn't long before my thoughts kept drifting back to Karen and her behavior. Was this an isolated incident? Or was something more insidious happening here? I wasn't sure yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she would be back, likely sooner than I wanted. When the doorbell rang again a few hours later, I knew I wasn't wrong. The doorbell rang again the next day, more insistent this time. My heart skipped, and I immediately knew who it was. Karen. The thought of her made my stomach tighten. I hadn't even finished my morning coffee yet, and I could already feel the tension mounting from yesterday's encounter. I stood frozen for a moment, wondering if I should just ignore it. But I knew she wouldn't go away. She never did. I opened the door reluctantly, trying to maintain composure. "Hi, Karen," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "What's up?" She stood there, smiling wide, holding that familiar tote bag in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Good morning. I thought I'd stop by and see if you needed help with anything. You know, I was just thinking about your garage sale idea. If you're planning one, I can help you organize it. I've got lots of experience with these things." I blinked, still trying to process what she was saying. "I told you yesterday, Karen. I'm not having a garage sale. Just clearing some stuff out for donation. Nothing more." She glanced behind me into the house, her eyes narrowing slightly as they scanned the room. Well, you've still got plenty of stuff around here that could use a good home. You know, you're just wasting all these things by leaving them here." Without waiting for permission, she stepped into the entryway, her presence filling the space like she owned it. I stepped back, annoyed. "Karen, please don't come in." But she was already moving past me, as though she hadn't even heard me. "You won't even miss any of this stuff. Look at this." She picked up a lamp from the side table, inspecting it like it was a valuable relic. "This would look perfect in my living room. I've been meaning to change up the lighting." She was practically glowing with excitement as she tested the weight of the lamp, as if it was hers for the taking. I felt my face flush with anger. "Karen, that lamp is mine. I'm not giving anything away right now. I told you already." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I'm just helping you get rid of things you don't need. Look at all this clutter. Wouldn't it feel better to have a cleaner, more organized space?" She gave a little laugh, clearly oblivious to how frustrated I was becoming. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to stay calm. "I don't need your help, Karen. And I definitely don't need you taking things from my house." "Oh, come on," she said, her tone suddenly sweet but patronizing. "I'm just being kind. You know I've got a good eye for this kind of thing. You'd be amazed at how much stuff you can unload when you're not so attached to it." She set the lamp back down and picked up a vase from the shelf, tilting it to examine it from every angle. "This one's nice too. You're not using it, right?" I could feel my patience snapping. "I told you yesterday, this is not a giveaway. You need to leave." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like annoyance in her eyes. "You really don't get it, do you? I'm doing you a favor. You're just too stubborn to accept it. Why hang on to all this stuff if it's just sitting here? I'm taking it off your hands. Think of it as a win-win." Her words stung, but there was something even worse underneath them, a quiet assumption that she was in the right, and I was the one being unreasonable. I was trying to control my anger, but it was getting harder by the second. I stepped forward, blocking her from picking up anything else. "Listen to me," I said, my voice more forceful now. "I don't need your help. I've already told you twice now. Please leave my house." Karen stopped for a moment, studying me like I was the one who had lost my mind. Then, as if she were humoring me, she sighed deeply. "Fine, I'll leave. But you know, you really need to stop holding on to so much junk." She turned toward the door, but not without one last parting shot. "You're welcome, by the way. People like me are the ones who actually make life easier for people like you." She stepped out onto the porch and made her way to the driveway, leaving me standing there, dumbfounded. Her audacity was mind-boggling. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I had no idea what her next move would be, but I knew she wasn't going to give up that easily. It felt like I was caught in some kind of strange tug-of-war where she thought she was doing me a favor, but all I could see was someone repeatedly crossing boundaries without a care in the world. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I did my best to push the encounter from my mind and focus on getting things done around the house. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karen wasn't done yet. It wasn't long before I got the sense that her next visit was already looming on the horizon. The next afternoon, just as I was starting to relax on the couch with a book, the doorbell rang again. I didn't even have to check the peephole. I knew who it was. I opened the door, steeling myself for whatever was about to unfold. There she was, smiling that smile of hers, completely unfazed by the last interaction we had. "Hi there," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd come by to see how you were doing. You know, you really should take me up on my offer to help with your decluttering. It could be so much easier with my expertise." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. "Karen, I've already told you twice that I'm not giving anything away. Please leave me alone." She stepped forward as if she hadn't even heard me, and her eyes gleamed with determination. "Oh, I know you said that, but I've been thinking. You don't really need all of this, do you?" She motioned toward a collection of items I'd recently set aside for donation. "There's no point in keeping things you don't use. Let me help you clear this out for good." And that's when I realized the woman wasn't going to listen to reason. She wasn't just trying to help anymore. She was taking things without asking, assuming that her version of help was the only one that mattered. My pulse quickened, the frustration rising in my chest. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. "I'm not giving you anything. This ends now." She froze for a moment, but then she smiled that same, insufferable smile. "You really should just relax," she said with that same air of condescension. "You'd feel so much better without all this clutter. Trust me." Before I could stop her, she reached for a vase on the counter, like she'd done the day before. And that was it. My breaking point. "Karen, if you take one more thing from this house, I will call the police," I snapped. Her eyes widened for a second, then narrowed, as if weighing my threat. For a moment, I thought she might finally back off, but she didn't. Instead, she turned, stepping off my porch without another word, the vase still in her hand. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat in the living room, my mind racing. It had been 2 days since Karen's last visit, and I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. My nerves were on edge, the tension still lingering in my home like an unwanted guest. I tried to focus on something, anything, but it was useless. The thought of her taking things, assuming I was just going to hand them over without a second thought, gnawed at me. She crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide any longer. The doorbell rang again. I knew it was her before I even checked the peephole. There was no mistaking that persistent, self-assured presence. I was done being polite. No more half-hearted attempts to set boundaries. No more letting her think she could take whatever she wanted from me. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking with a mix of frustration and anticipation. This time, I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I opened the door before she could ring again, my gaze locking with hers. "Karen," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, unfazed by my tone. "Well, hello to you too. I was just thinking about your place again, and—" "No," I cut her off, taking a step closer to the threshold, blocking her from entering. "You're not taking anything from me today. Ever again." Her smile faltered for a brief moment, but it quickly returned, more insistent than before. "Oh, come on. You're being unreasonable. I'm just helping you clear out some of this." She gestured vaguely toward the house behind me. "Clutter. It's not doing you any good just sitting here. That's the problem," I said, my voice sharper now. "You keep thinking this is yours to take. You don't have the right to go through my things and help yourself. And you sure as hell don't have the right to keep showing up here uninvited." She scoffed, clearly dismissing my words as if they were nothing. "You're overreacting. You know, I'm doing you a favor. You need to stop hoarding so much. Why not just let go? It'll be better for you, really. I mean, I've seen what you have here. You could definitely make more use of it elsewhere. I felt a heat rise in my chest, my anger burning brighter with every word she spoke. I'm not hoarding, Karen. I'm keeping what I want. I don't need you to come in here and decide what I need to get rid of. Do you understand that? She crossed her arms, looking at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. No, I don't understand, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But I'm sure you'll come around. I'll just take this, she said, reaching for a lamp on the table next to me. I grabbed her wrist before she could get any closer. You're not taking anything from here, I said through gritted teeth. Her eyes widened, the shock barely covering the annoyance creeping across her face. She jerked her arm away from my grip, her voice rising with indignation. How dare you touch me? This is my neighborhood too, you know. I'm just trying to help. And you're not helping. I interrupted, my voice now trembling with rage. You're taking what doesn't belong to you, and I'm done letting you get away with it. If you can't respect my boundaries, then you need to stay the hell away from me and my house. She stood there for a long, tense moment, her eyes narrowing as she processed my words. There was a flicker of something behind her gaze, like she wasn't used to being challenged. For a second, I almost thought she might back down, but then her lips curled into that infuriating smile again, and I knew she wasn't finished. Fine, she said, her voice ice cold now. You want to play this game? You won't win, you know. I'm not going to let this little tantrum of yours stop me from helping you. She stepped back, clearly ready to leave, but before she turned, she shot me one last look. You'll see. Everyone needs help, whether they admit it or not. The door slammed shut behind her, and I stood there, breathless, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to say that, like she was in the right, like I was the one being unreasonable. I couldn't sit back and wait for her to make her next move. I couldn't just let her keep pushing until she decided that everything I owned was up for grabs. No, I needed to take control before it escalated even further. This wasn't just about a lamp or a vase anymore. This was about respect, about standing my ground. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the one number I hadn't wanted to call, the number for the local authorities. The operator picked up after a few rings. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report harassment, I said, my voice steady but firm. A woman named Karen from down the street keeps showing up at my house, taking things without my permission. I've asked her to stop, but she's persistent, and I'm afraid it's going to escalate. The operator listened patiently as I gave a brief overview of the situation, outlining the repeated visits, the thefts, and my growing fear that Karen wouldn't stop until I had no choice but to take drastic measures. After what felt like an eternity, the operator reassured me they would send someone out to handle the situation. Hanging up, I took a deep breath. I hadn't wanted to get the authorities involved, but I couldn't let her think she had the upper hand. This had gone on long enough. I sat in the living room, waiting for the officers to arrive, every minute dragging on longer than the last. It felt like my house was under siege. Every knock at the door, every rustle outside, made me jump, my nerves frayed. I couldn't let Karen win. I couldn't let her take what wasn't hers, or let her think she could control me like this. Finally, the doorbell rang again. I froze, my stomach dropping into my shoes. I wasn't ready for another confrontation. Not yet, but I couldn't back down. I had to face her. I opened the door, my body tense, prepared for whatever she was about to throw at me. But it wasn't Karen standing there. It was a police officer. "Are you the homeowner?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "Yes," I replied, a wave of relief flooding through me. "Thank you for coming." The officer nodded, stepping inside. "We've received reports of an ongoing dispute. Can you tell me what's been happening?" As I began to explain, I realized that for the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't powerless. This was the final line, and I wasn't going to let her cross it anymore. The officer stepped inside, his presence a quiet reassurance that things were about to change. I led him into the living room, my pulse still racing as I recounted everything that had happened. Each visit, each interaction, the things Karen had taken, and the threats she'd made. I gave him the rundown as concisely as I could, trying to keep my nerves from spilling over. I wasn't sure what I expected from him, but I wasn't about to let this woman keep terrorizing me, not without someone else hearing me out. The officer listened carefully, nodding along, taking notes. He didn't interrupt once, which made it easier to speak freely. It felt like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. At least, for the moment, I wasn't alone in this. "Okay," he said when I finished, looking at me with a calm, yet professional demeanor. "We'll go down and talk to her. But I need you to stay here, just in case anything escalates." "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse with the tension I'd been carrying for days. He gave me a reassuring nod before heading out the door. I sat back on the couch, my mind spinning with a dozen possible outcomes. I tried not to imagine Karen's reaction when she saw the officer. She had no idea how serious this had become, how far I was willing to go to stop her from taking my things and treating me like I wasn't in control of my own life. The minutes ticked by like hours, each second dragging on as I waited, uncertain of what would happen next. It wasn't long before the officer returned, this time with Karen in tow. I could hear her voice before I even saw her, a shrill, defensive tone that made my blood boil. "I didn't do anything wrong," she was yelling. "You can't just show up at my house and accuse me of stealing." I stood up, the sudden realization hitting me. This was the confrontation I had been dreading, the one I had been preparing for without even knowing it. I had been waiting for her to make her next move. But now it was happening. Now I was face to face with her, and this time, there would be no backing down. The officer looked between the two of us, his expression hardening slightly. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Karen directly, "I've heard the claims from the homeowner. We've already spoken to you, and I need to ask that you stop showing up here uninvited. You're crossing boundaries, and if you continue to do so, we'll have to take further action." Karen's eyes narrowed as she glared at me, her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't used to being told what to do. She was used to being the one in control, the one calling the shots. And now, with the officer standing here, it was all slipping through her fingers. "I've done nothing wrong," she insisted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I was just helping. I'm not a thief. She's the one who's being unreasonable, not me." I stepped forward, my heart thumping in my chest, but my resolve firmer than ever. "Karen," I said, my voice unwavering, "you've been stealing from me. You've taken my things without asking, and you've shown up here repeatedly, despite me telling you to stop. This is harassment, plain and simple." Her gaze flickered, and for just a second, I saw a brief flash of uncertainty in her eyes, but it was quickly masked by her usual arrogance. She straightened her back, trying to regain control of the situation, but the damage had been done. The officer wasn't backing her up anymore. "I've told you," the officer said, his voice firm, "if you don't leave this property immediately and stop harassing the homeowner, you will be facing charges." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the officer didn't give her the chance. "That's enough," he said, his tone brokering no disagreement. "You need to leave. Now." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stood there for a moment, her eyes flicking from the officer to me, clearly unsure of what to do next. I could feel my heart racing, a mix of relief and satisfaction slowly creeping in. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. Finally, with a stiff, defiant huff, Karen turned on her heel and marched out of the house, the officer following closely behind. As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was over, at least for now. She wasn't coming back. Not unless she wanted to deal with the consequences of her actions. I sank back into the couch, my body suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened. My muscles were sore from the tension of the past few days, and my mind was still buzzing with the adrenaline of the confrontation. It wasn't over completely. There was still the potential for more fallout, for Karen to push back in some way. But for now, for today, I had won. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't sure if I could handle another surprise visitor, But when I opened the door, I found the officer standing there again. This time, his expression was a little less stern, more understanding. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his voice a little gentler now. "We've got her on record now, so if she tries anything again, we can take action right away. I'll be sure to make a report." "Thank you," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. I didn't know what else to do. She wouldn't listen. The officer nodded. "Sometimes, that's all you can do. Stand your ground. You did the right thing." I let out a breath, feeling the tension finally begin to ebb away. "I'm just glad it's over. For now," he said with a faint smile. "But if she shows up again, don't hesitate to call us. We'll be ready." With that, he gave me one last nod before walking back to his patrol car. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment. It was over. Karen had been put in her place, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't sure what Karen's next move would be, but I didn't care. I had taken control of my life again, and nothing she did could take that away. I had stood up for myself, set boundaries, and made it clear that I wouldn't be intimidated. That was all that mattered. And as I looked around my house, I realized something else. It wasn't just about the things Karen had tried to take. It was about what I had protected. My home, my space, my peace. For now, that was enough.